All right, I'm reading today from the knowledge argument and the addendum of what Mary doesn't know, um, which is by Frank Jackson. So, Epiphenomenal Qualia. It is undeniable that the physical, chemical, and biological sciences have provided a great deal of information about the world we live in and about ourselves. I will use the label physical information for this kind of information and also for information that automatically comes along with it. For example, if a medical scientist tells me enough about the processes that go on in my nervous system and about how they relate to happenings in the world around me, to what has happened in the past and is likely to happen in the future, to what happens to other similar and dissimilar organisms, and the like, he or she tells me, if I'm clever enough to fit it together appropriately, but what it is often called the functional role of these states in me and in organisms in general in similar cases. This information and its kin I also label physical. I don't mean this, these sketchy I do not mean these sketchy remarks to constitute a definition of physical information and of the correlative notion of physical property, process, and so on, but to indicate what I have in mind here. It is well known that there are problems with giving a precise definition of these notions, and so of the thesis of physicalism that all correct information is physical information. But unlike some, I take the question of definition to cut across the central problems I want to discuss in this paper. I am what is sometimes known as a qualia freak. I think that there are certain features of the bodily sensation, especially also of certain perceptual experiences, which no amount of purely physical information includes. Tell me everything physical there is to tell about what it is going on in a living brain, the kind of states, their functional role, their relation to what goes on at other times and in other brains, and so on and so forth. And be I as clever as I can be in fitting it all together, you won't have told me about the hurtfulness of pains, the itchiness of itches, pangs of jealousy, or about the characteristic experience of tasting a lemon, smelling a rose, hearing a loud noise, or seeing the sky. There are many qualia freaks, and some of them say that their rejection of physicalism is an unargued intuition. I think that they are being unfair to themselves. They have the following argument. Nothing you could tell of a physical sort captures the smell of a rose, for instance. Therefore, physicalism is false. By our lights, this is a perfectly good argument. It is obviously not the point to question its validity, and the premise is intuitively obviously true both to them and to me. I must, however, admit that it is weak from a polemical point of view. There are, unfortunately for us, many who do not find the premise intuitively obvious. The task then is to present an argument whose premises are obvious to all, or at least to as many as possible. This I try to do in section 1 with what I call the knowledge argument. In section 2, I contrast the knowledge argument with the modal argument, and in section 3, with what it's like to be argument. In section 4, I tackle the question of the causal role of qualia. The major factor in stopping people from admitting qualia is their belief that they would have to be given a causal role with respect to the physical world and especially the brain. And it is hard to do this without sounding like someone who believes in fairies. I seek in section 4 to turn this objection by arguing that the view that qualia are epiphenomenal is a perfectly possible one. 1. The knowledge argument for qualia. People vary considerably in their ability to discriminate colors. Suppose that, in an experiment to catalog this variation, Fred is discovered. Fred has better color vision than anyone else on record. He makes every discrimination that anyone has ever made, and moreover, he makes one that we cannot even begin to make. Show him a batch of ripe tomatoes, and he sorts them into two roughly equal groups, and does so with complete consistency. That is, if you blindfold him, shuffle the tomatoes up, and then remove the blindfold and ask him to sort them out again, he sorts them out into exactly the same two groups. We ask Fred how he does it. He explains all ripe tomatoes do not look the same color to him. And in fact, this is true of great many objects that we classify together as red. He sees two colors where we see one, and he has, in consequence, developed for his own use two words, red 1 and red 2, to mark the difference. Perhaps he tells us that he has often tried to teach the difference between red 1 and red 2 to his friends, but has gone nowhere and has concluded that the rest of the world is red 1, red 2 colorblind. Or perhaps he has partial success with children. It doesn't matter. In any case, he explains to us that it would be quite wrong to think that because red appears in both red 1 and red 2, that the two colors are a shade of one color. He only uses the common term red to fit more easily into a restricted usage. To him, red and red are different from each other, and all the other colors as yellow is from blue. And his discriminatory behavior bears this out. He sorts red from red 2 tomatoes with the greatest of ease in a wide variety of viewing circumstances. Moreover, an investigation of the physiological basis of Fred's exceptional ability reveals that Fred's optical system is able to separate out two groups of wavelength in the red spectrum as sharply as we are able to sort out yellow from blue. I think we should admit that Fred can see, really see, at least one more color than we can. Red 1 is a different color from red 2. We are to Fred as totally red-green colorblind person is to us. H.G. Wells' story, The Country of the Blind, is about a sighted person in a totally blind community. This person never manages to convince them that he can see, that he has an extra sense. They ridicule his hence as quite inconceivable and treat his capacity to avoid falling into ditches, to win fights and so on as precisely that capacity and nothing more. We would be making their mistake if we refuse to allow that Fred can see one more color than we can. What kind of experience does Fred have when he sees red 1 and red 2? What is the new color or colors like? We would dearly like to know, but do not. And it seems that no amount of physical information about Fred's brain and optical system tells us. We find out perhaps that Fred's cones respond differently to certain light waves in Red's section of the spectrum that makes no difference to ours. Or perhaps he has an extra cone. And this leads in Fred to a wide range of those brain states responsible for visual discriminatory behavior. But none of this tells us what we really want to know about his color experience. There is something about it we don't know. But we know, we may suppose, everything about Fred's body, his behavior and dispositions to behavior, and about his internal physiology, and everything about his history and relation to others that can be given in physical accounts of persons. We have all the physical information. Therefore, knowing all this is not knowing everything about Fred. It follows that physicalism leaves something out. To reinforce this conclusion, imagine that as a result of our investigation into the internal workings of Fred, we find out how to make everyone's physiology like Fred's in the relevant respect, or perhaps Fred donates his body to science, and on his death we're able to transplant his optical system into someone else again. The fine details don't really matter. The important point is that such a happening would create enormous interest. People will say, at last we will know what it's like to see extra color, and at last we will know how Fred has differed from us in the way he has struggled to tell us about for so long. Then it cannot be that we knew all along about Fred. By its hypothesis, we did know all along everything about Fred that features in the physicalist scheme. Hence, the physicalist scheme leaves something out. Put this way, after the operation, we will know more about Fred and especially about his color experience. But beforehand, we had all the physical information we could desire about his body and brain, and indeed everything that has ever featured in physicalist accounts of mind and consciousness. Hence, there is more to know than all that. Hence, physicalism is incomplete. Fred and the new colors are, of course, essentially rhetorical devices. The same point can be made with normal people and familiar colors. Mary is a brilliant scientist who is, for whatever reason, forced to investigate the world from a black and white room via a black and white television monitor. She specializes in the neurophysiology of vision and acquires, let us suppose, all the physical information there is to obtain about what goes on when we see ripe tomatoes or the sky, and use terms like red, blue, and so on. She discovers, for example, just which wavelength combinations from the sky stimulate the retina and exactly how this produces via the central nervous system the contractions of the vocal cords and expulsions of air from the lungs that result in the uttering of the sentence, "The sky is blue." It can hardly be denied that it is in principle possible to obtain all the physical information from black and white television. Otherwise, the Open University would of necessity need to use color television. What would happen when Mary is released from her black and white room or is given a color television monitor? Will she learn anything or not? It seems just obvious that she will learn something about the world and her experience of it. But then it is inescapable that her previous knowledge was incomplete. But she had all the physical information. Ergo, there's more to have than that, and physicalism is false. Clearly, the same style of argument could be deployed for taste, hearing, the bodily sensations, and generally speaking, for the various mental states which are said to have raw feels, phenomenal features, or qualia. The conclusion in each case is that the qualia are left out of the physicalist story. And the polemical strength of the knowledge argument is that it is so hard to deny the central claim that one can have all the physical information without having all the information there is to have. 2. The modal argument. By the modal argument, I mean an argument of the following style. Skeptics about other minds are not making a mistake in deductive logic, whatever else may be wrong with their position. No amount of physical information about an other logically entails that he or she is conscious or feels anything at all. Consequently, there is a possible world where organisms exactly like us in every physical aspect, but which differ from us profoundly in that they have no conscious mental life at all. But then, what is it that we have and they lack? Not anything physical, ex hypothesis. In all physical regards, we are and they are exactly alike. Consequently, there is more to us than the purely physical. Thus, physicalism is false. It is sometimes objected that the modal argument misconceives physicalism on the ground that doctrine is advanced as a contingent truth. But to say this is only to say that physicalists restrict their claim to some possible worlds, including specially ours, and the modal argument is only directed against this lesser claim. If we in our world, let alone beings in any others, have features additional to those of our physical replicas in the other possible worlds, then we have non-physical features or qualia. The trouble, rather, with the modal argument is that it rests on a disputable modal intuition. Disputable because it is disputed. Some sincerely deny that there can be physical replicas of us in other possible worlds, which nevertheless lack consciousness. Moreover, at least one person once had the intuition, now has doubts. Moreover, at least one person who once had that intuition now has doubts. Head counting may seem a poor approach to a discussion of the modal argument, but frequently we can do no better when modal intuitions are in question. And remember, our initial goal was to find the argument with the greatest polemical utility. Of course, qua protagonists of the knowledge argument, we may well accept the modal intuition in question. But this will be a consequence of our already having an argument to the conclusion that qualia are left out of the physical story, not our ground for that conclusion. Moreover, the matter is complicated by the possibility that the connection between matters, physical, and qualia is like that sometimes held to obtain between aesthetic qualities and natural ones. Two possible worlds which agree in all natural respects, must agree in all aesthetic qualities as well, but it is plausible held that the aesthetic qualities cannot be reduced to the natural. 3. The what is like to be argument. In What is like to be a bat, Thomas Nagel argues that no amount of physical information can tell us what it is like to be a bat, and indeed that we, human beings, cannot imagine what it is like to be a bat. His reason is that what this is like can only be understood from a bat's point of view, which is not our point of view, and is not something capturable in physical terms, which are essentially terms understandable equally from many points of view. It is important to distinguish this argument from the knowledge argument. When I complained that all the physical knowledge about Fred was not enough to tell us what his special color experience was like, I was not complaining that weren't finding out what it's like to be Fred. I was complaining that there is something about his experience, a property of it, of which we were left ignorant. And if and when we come to know that this property is, we still will not know what it's like to be Fred. But we will know more about him. No amount of knowledge about Fred, be it physical or not, amounts to knowledge from the inside concerning Fred. We are not Fred. There is thus a whole set of items of knowledge expressed by forms of words like that it is I, myself, who is, which Fred has, and we simply cannot have because we're not him. When Fred sees the color he alone sees, one thing he knows is the way his experience of it differs from his experience of seeing red and so on. Another is that he himself is seeing it. Physicalists and quality freaks alike should acknowledge that no amount of information of whatever kind that others have about Fred amounts to the knowledge of the second. My complaint, though, concerned the first was that the special quality of his experience is certainly a fact about it, and one which physicalism leaves out because no amount of physical information told us what it is. Nagel speaks as if the problem he is raising is one of extrapolating from knowledge or one experience to another, of imagining what an unfamiliar experience would be like on the basis of familiar ones. In terms of Hume's example, from knowledge of some shades of blue, we can work out what it would be like to see other shades of blue. Nagel argues that the trouble with bats is that they are too unlike us. It is hard to see an objection to physicalism here. Physicalism makes no special claim about the imaginative or exploratory powers of human beings, and it is hard to see why it needs to do so. Anyway, our knowledge argument makes no assumptions on this point. If physicalism were true, enough physical information about Fred would obviate any need to extrapolate or to perform special feats of imagination or understanding in order to know all about his special color experience. The information would already be in our possession, but it clearly isn't. That was the nub of the argument. 4. The bogey of epiphenomenalism. Is there any really good reason for refusing to countenance the idea that qualia are causally impotent with respect to the physical world? I will argue for the answer no, but in doing this, I will say nothing about two views associated with the classical epiphenomenalist position. First is that the mental states are inefficacious with respect to the physical world. All I will be concerned to defend is that it is possible to hold that certain properties of certain mental states, namely those of called qualia, are such that their possession or absence makes no difference to the physical world. The second is that the mental is totally causally inefficacious. For all I will say, it may be that you have to hold that the instantiation of qualia makes a difference to the other mental states, though not to anything physical. And the general considerations to do with how you could come to be aware in the instantiation of qualia suggests such a position. 3 reasons are standardly given for holding that qualia, like the hurtfulness of a pain must be causally efficacious in the physical world, and so on. For instance, that its instantiation must sometimes make a difference to what happens in the brain. None, I will argue, has any real force. 1. It is supposed to be just obvious that the hurtfulness of pain is partly responsible for the subject seeking to avoid pain, saying it hurts and so on. But to reverse Hume, anything can fail to cause anything. No matter how often B follows A, no matter how initially obvious the causality of the connection seems, the hypothesis that A causes B can be overturned by an overarching theory which shows the two as distinct effects of a common underlying causal process. To the untutored, the image on screen of Lee Marvin's first moving from left to right, immediately following the image of John Wayne's head moving in the same general direction, looks as causal as anything. And of course, throughout countless Western images similar to the first are followed by images similar to the second. All this counts for precisely nothing when we know the overarching theory concerning how relevant images are effect of an underlying causal process involving the projector and the film. The epiphenomenalist can say exactly the same about the connection between, for example, hurtfulness and behavior. It is simply a consequence of the fact that certain happenings in the brain cause both. 2. The second objection relates to Darwin's theory of evolution. According to natural selection, the traits that evolve over time are those conducive to physical survival. We may assume that qualia evolve over time. We have them. The earliest forms of life do not, and so we should expect qualia to be conducive to survival. The objection is that they could hardly help us survive if they do nothing to the physical world. The appeal of this argument is undeniable, but there is a good reply to it. Polar bears have particularly thick, warm coats. The theory of evolution explains this, we suppose, by pointing out having a thick, warm coat is conducive to survival in the Arctic. But having a thick coat goes along with having a heavy coat, and having a heavy coat is not conducive to survival. It slows the animal down. Does this mean that we have refuted Darwin because we have found an evolved trait, a heavy coat, which is not conducive to survival? Clearly not. Having a heavy coat is an unavoidable concomitant of having a warm coat. And the advantage for survival of having a warm coat outweighs the disadvantages of having a heavy one. The point is that all we can extract from Darwin's theory is that we should expect any evolved characteristics to be either conducive to survival or a byproduct of one that is so conducive. The epiphenomenalist holds that qualia epiphenomenalist holds that qualia fall in the latter category. They are a byproduct of certain brain processes that are highly conducive to survival. Third, the third objection is based on a point about how we come to know about other minds. We know about other minds by knowing about other behavior, at least in part. The nature of the inference is a matter of some controversy, but it is not a matter of controversy that proceeds from behavior. That is why we think that stones do not feel and dogs do feel. But runs the objection, how can a person's behavior provide any reason for believing he has qualia like mine, or indeed any qualia at all, unless this behavior can be regarded as the outcome of qualia? Man Friday's footprints was evidence of Man Friday because footprints are causal outcomes of feet attached to people. And an epiphenomenalist cannot regard behavior or indeed anything physical as the outcome of qualia. But consider my reading in the Times that the Spurs won. This paragraph, excellent evidence that the Telegraph has also reported that Spurs won, despite the fact that I trust the Telegraph does not get the results from the Times. They each send their own reporter to the game. The Telegraph's report is in no sense an outcome of the Times, but the latter provides good evidence for the former nevertheless. The reasoning involved can be reconstructed thus. I read in the Times that Spurs won. This gives me reason to think that Spurs won because I know that Spurs winning is the most likely candidate to be what caused the report in the Times. But I also know that Spurs winning would have had many effects, including almost certainly a report in the Telegraph. I am arguing from one effect back to its cause and out again to another effect. The fact that neither effect causes the other is irrelevant. Now the epiphenomenalist allows that qualia are effects of what goes on in the brain. Qualia cause nothing physical, but are caused by something physical. Hence, the epiphenomenalist can argue from the behavior of others to the qualia of others by arguing from the behavior of others back to its causes in the brain of others and out again to other qualia. You may well feel, for one reason or another, that this is a more dubious chain of reasoning than its model in the case of the newspaper reports. You are right. The problem of other minds is a major philosophical problem. The problem of other newspaper reports is not. But there is no special problem of epiphenomenalism as opposed to, say, interactionism here. There is a very understandable response to the three replies I have just made. All right, there is no knockdown refutation of the existence of epiphenomenal qualia, but the fact remains that they are an excrescence. They do nothing. They explain nothing. They serve merely to soothe the intuitions of dualists. It is left a total mystery how they fit into the world view of science. In short, we do not and cannot understand the how and the why of them. This is perfectly true, but is no objection to qualia, for it rests on an overly optimistic view of the human animal and its powers. We are the product of evolution. We understand and sense that we need to understand and sense in order to survive. Epiphenomenal qualia are totally irrelevant to survival. At no stage of our evolution did natural selection favor those who could make sense of how they are caused and the laws governing them, or in fact why they exist at all. And this is why we can't. It is not sufficiently appreciated that physicalism is an extremely optimistic view of our power. If it is true, we have, in a very broad outline, admittedly, a grasp of our place in the scheme of things. Certain matters of sheer complexity defeat us. There are an awful lot of neurons, but in principle, we have it all. But consider the antecedent probability that everything in the universe to be a kind that is relevant in some way or another to the survival of Homo sapiens. It is very low, surely, but then one must admit that it is very likely that there is a part of the whole scheme of things, maybe a big part, which no amount of evolution will ever bring us near to knowledge about or understanding. For the simple reason that such a knowledge and understanding is irrelevant to survival. Physicalists typically emphasize that we are part of nature on their view, which is fair enough. But if we are part of nature, we are as nature has left us after however many years of evolution it is, and each step in that evolutionary progress has been a matter of chance, constrained just by the need to preserve or increase survival value. The wonder is that we understand as much as we do, and there is no wonder that there should be matters which fall quite outside our comprehension. Perhaps exactly how epiphenomenal qualia fit into the scheme of things is one such. This may seem unduly pessimistic view of our capacity to articulate a truly comprehensible picture of our world and our place in it. But suppose we discover living on the bottom of the deepest oceans a sort of sea slug which manifested intelligence, perhaps survival in the conditions required rational powers. Despite their intelligence, these sea slugs have only a very restricted conception of the world by comparison with ours. The explanation for this being the nature of their immediate environment. Nevertheless, they have developed sciences which work surprisingly well in these restricted terms. They also have philosophers called sluggists. Some call themselves tough-minded sluggists. Others confess to being soft-minded sluggists. The tough-minded sluggists hold that the restricted terms, or ones pretty like them, which may be introduced as their science progresses, suffice in principle to describe everything without remainder. These tough-minded sluggists admit in moments of weakness to a feeling that their theory leaves something out. They resist the feeling, and their opponents, the soft-minded sluggists, point out, absolutely correctly, Thus, no logist has ever succeeded in spelling out how this mysterious residue fits into the highly successful view that their scientists have and are developing on how their world works. Our sea slugs don't exist, but they might. And there might also exist super beings which stand to us as we stand to the sea slugs. We can adopt the perspective. We cannot adopt the perspective of these super beings because we're not them. But the possibility of such a perspective is, I think, an antidote to excessive optimism. Addendum from what Mary didn't know. 3 clarifications. The knowledge argument does not rest on the dubious claim that logically you cannot imagine what sensing red is, like unless is the knowledge argument does not rest on the dubious claim that logically you cannot imagine what sensed red is like unless you have sensed red. Powers of imagination are not the point. The contention about Mary is not that despite her fantastic grasp of neurophysiology and everything else physical, she could not imagine what it's like to sense red. It is that, as a matter of fact, she would not know. But if physicalism is true, she would know, and no great powers of imagination would be called for. Imagination is a faculty that those who lack knowledge need to fall back on. Secondly, the intentionality of knowledge is not the point. The argument does not rest on assuming falsely that if S knows that A is F and A equals B, then S knows that B is F. It is concerned with the nature of Mary's total body of knowledge before she is released. Is it complete, or do some facts escape it? What is to the point is that S may know that A is F and know that A equals B, yet arguably not know what B is, that B is F, by virtue of not being sufficiently logically alert to follow the consequences through. If Mary's lack of knowledge were all like this, there would be no threat to physicalism in it. But it is very hard to believe that her lack of knowledge could be remedied merely by her explicitly following through enough logical consequence and her vast physical knowledge. Endowing her with great logical acumen and persistence is not in itself enough to fill the gaps in her knowledge. On being let out, she will not say, I could have worked all this out before making some more pure. I could have worked all this out before by making some more purely logical inferences. Thirdly, we know the knowledge that Mary lacked, which is of particular point for the knowledge argument against physicalism, is knowledge about the experiences of others, not about her own. When she is let out, she has new experiences, color experiences she has never had before. It is not, therefore, an objection to physicalism that she learned something on being let out. Before she was let out, she could not have had known facts about her experience of red, for there were no such facts to know. That physicalists and non-physicalists alike can agree on. After she's let out, things change. And physicalism can happily admit that she learns this. After all, some physical things will change, for instance, her brain states in their functional roles. The trouble for physicalism is that after Mary sees her first ripe tomato, she will realize how impoverished her conception of the mental life of others has been all along. She will realize that there was all the time she was carrying out her laborious investigations into the neurophysiologies of others and into the functional roles of their mental states, something about these people she was quite unaware of. All along, their experiences had a feature conspicuous to them, but until now hidden from her. In fact, not in logic. But she knew all the physical facts about them all along. Hence, what she did not know until her release is not a physical fact about their experience, but it is a fact about them. That is the trouble for physicalism. The Churchland's 3 objections. Churchland's first objection is that the knowledge argument contains a defect that is simplicity itself. The argument equivocates on the sense of knows about. How so? Churchland suggests that the following is a conveniently tightened version of the knowledge argument. 1. Mary knows everything there is to know about brain states and their properties. 2. It is not the case that Mary knows everything there is to know about the sensations and their properties. Therefore, by Leibniz's law, sensations and their properties are not brain states and their properties. Churchland observes plausibly enough that the type of kind of knowledge involved in premise 1 is distinct from the type of knowledge involved in premise 2. We might follow this lead and tag the first knowledge by description and the second knowledge by acquaintance. But whatever the tags, he is right that the displayed argument involves a highly dubious use of Leibniz's law. My reply is that the displayed argument may be convenient, but it's not accurate. It is not the knowledge argument. Take, for instance, premise 1. The whole thrust of the knowledge argument is that Mary, before her release, does not know everything there is to know about brain states and their properties, because she does not know about certain quality associated with them. What is complete, according to the argument, is her knowledge of matters physical. A convenient and accurate way of displaying the argument is this. 1. Prime, Mary, before her release, knows everything physical there is to know about other people. 2. Prime, Mary, before her release, does not know everything there is to know about other people, because she learned something about them on her release. Therefore, 3. Prime, there are truths about other people and herself which escape the physicalist story. What is immediately to the point is not the kind, manner, or type of knowledge Mary has, but what she knows. What she knows beforehand is ex hypothesis, everything physical there is to know, but is it everything there is to know? That is the crucial question.